Hello. Welcome on our presentation when we will talk about the Glassfish story, about how we rescued Glassfish from being a huge unmaintainable, obsoleted project and being again maintainable and modern. It is work in progress, but we will talk about it closer. My name is David Matějček. With me is Arjan Teams. We are both from company Omnifish, and we are both contributors of Glassfish, and I am one of 3 leaders of Glassfish project. Long story short, everyone knows how to create unmaintainable project, but nobody knows how to create maintainable projects. Some people know how to get out of that situation. Everyone knows this quote, when you discover you are riding a dead horse, the best strategy is to dismount. But it means something. It means stopping the project at all, and it will die. Many companies, depending on that, will end or will be forced to migrate to another solution, and it will mean quite huge costs sometimes. So the question is, well, then what? We tried to rescue Glassfish, and we succeeded. Basically, it's not finished job, but first thing you meet when you want to do such work is that you need a quite good hardware for your work. Many people complain about their hardware. Many companies provide just low performance laptops for their developers, and it's quite difficult to maintain huge projects when you don't have enough memory and when you didn't invest enough money to your computer. For example, on the right side, there are caterpillars. You know that these people are not much rich, but they have quite expensive hardware for their work. So don't be ashamed and ask good hardware for your work. Another issue is that people love buzzwords and metaphors and all those words surrounding us, and then they try to create definitions for them, and they usually fail because all those words are developing their meaning in time. So technical depth was rather metaphor. Zombies in current culture, it's not anymore a scary creature eating brains, but they socialize and so on. Integration tests, unit tests, with current technologies, it means it's defined where you declare a border. Unit is bordered somehow, and you test something in those borders. Earth can be unit, our planet. Integration test targets communication between units, rather. So and so on. Let's go on. Benders for errors, another trap. When you create workaround and then it's just temporary, basic unit of temporarity is the eternity. We have some parts in Glassfish which are obviously prototypes, and they are working for 20 years still. You have 2 options: to spend some time with the code and create some good solution from the prototype, or throw it away and start from scratch. But then you should keep it in good quality. Otherwise, you create workarounds for workarounds for workarounds, and you never end. Finally, you spend time just creating workarounds, so you are not moving forward. Premature optimization. When something is slow, you create caches, logs, thread pools. Glassfish has several thread pools, and they are targeting concrete thing. But when you start implementing such things too early, then you have to keep attention for their maintenance. Everything has some life cycle, and that life cycle must be closed. It cannot have. Yeah. I forgot the word. Let's go on. It everything must be perfect, basically. So even if you think that refactoring is expensive, it's still cheaper than creating workarounds for everything. When you have good, nice projects, you always find way how to break it. So this is Slovak adverb. The donkey was fine, so we went to slide on the ice and broke his legs. When you are happy with everything, you have perfect solution, you will add features. They can be good, but sometimes you open door to the hell. Be careful. Now we are on Glassfish. First thing I did on Glassfish sources is that I executed this script, and it removed mixed tabs with spaces just by 4 spaces. And I created check style configuration which forbids creating sources where are trailing spaces, tab characters, and so we are preventing those issues to come back. Why? You can see it on GitHub. Every time you see diff between older version and new version, white spaces complicates reviewing. It takes time. Check style can do much more things. Be careful what what you enable. Introducing it to sources when you have maybe 500 lines of codes, it's not easy, but step by step you can continue and improve the code base. PMD is another project. It is very old, and current developer team forgot or could not find what does it mean, the shortcut. So they created page where they tried to define that name. It is useful tool. It parses your sources and tries to detect usual anti-patterns. We didn't enable it yet, but it's in our schedule somehow. Another part of PMD project is copy-paste detector. Again, everyone knows copy-paste is awful. It is quickly done, and it is too expensive to maintain it. Spotbox, former name was Findbox. It checks your bytecode and again finds some anti-patterns. It partially duplicates what PMD can do, but it's as it parses bytecode, they are standalone. I'm forgetting words sometimes. Sorry. Jakarta is Java code coverage. It has it has Maven plugin. It is a successor of ECL Emma project. It's used to count coverage of your code. Important is that it's not so important how much code is covered, because it means just tests going through that code. It doesn't mean it is correct. But if the code is not covered at all, you know that those tests didn't touch it even. And Glassfish is now around 6%, meaning unit tests. We have quite a lot of integration tests or something in between, and currently we don't know how much code is covered. SonarQube, it's a cloud service, but you can, I think you can still install it on your own. It collects or previews mentioned tools, reports from them, and adds its own to analysis. And it can draw you a graph how what direction has your project in meaning of maintenance and security and all other things. You can see this is my private profile, so Glassfish is still a bit messy, but it doesn't mean that it can be hacked or it's insecure. These things are advisors. It doesn't define that everything that the fragile code can be reached from the outside, but it's something to do. Snake, that's another project that's quite new. It checks your code for security issues, and I will go faster for now. So what's new in Glassfish? In Glassfish 7, we rewrote Glassfish logging system. Basically, it is based on the former versions, but I tried to separate Glassfish dependencies, Glassfish jar files from the logging system, because the logging system is below everything. It is integrated in JVM, and one of first thing initialized in JVM is logging. Once you initialize log manager, you cannot change it. That's a bit difficult, and previous versions implemented workarounds for that. Now we don't need workarounds. And I try to cover the most of the code as much as was possible. Omnifish created the Docker image for Glassfish. We release a new version with every Glassfish version. You can find it on Docker Hub, and give us some feedback if you need to change something. We try to convince Docker Hub to so we will adopt the original official Glassfish repository in Docker Hub, but the Docker Hub team doesn't have much time, so they are postponing that still. Yet one thing, the Docker image is presented now under Omnifish, the Glassfish repository, to avoid this process. And another news, Eclipse approved the migration from Omnifish to Eclipse, so the Glassfish repository, Docker repository, will be official. Test containers. Now it's possible to use Glassfish with test containers. This is really trivial test. One advantage for these tests is that you can use them directly from Eclipse, from your editor, whatever you want. With that, you can, except that because test containers have some issues when you have a laptop, for example, managed by somebody else. You don't have admin account, so you cannot basically run Docker on your machine. Therefore, we created the Glassfish test environment class and Glassfish iTest tools. You can use this dependency in your projects. It's a bit limited compared to test containers, but basically to cover behavior of your application is good replacement. This is what is inside. Basically, it registers shutdown hook. So when your tests stop, Glassfish will stop too. It's not something difficult. One difficulty is with detecting where are we, what is the current directory, because Eclipse takes as the current directory the base dir of the project, but Maven uses target, if I remember well. Check it for sure. Then this is the test. Depending on this class, you can create deployment. I will show you on the next slide. Then it deploys to Glassfish, and after tests it can undeploy. But you can control it in JUnit 5 extension, for example. Whatever you want, you can. This uses shrink wrap, but you can also use dependency. Whatever you want, you can do. Yes, there's open extend. It is extendable. This is example how I run the test from the Eclipse. Preparation takes some 11 seconds, and running the test it's under 1 second. It's quite easy. Glassfish builds improved too. We have shortcut to get just Glassfish zip. Maven tests run 11 minutes on my machine, but there are also zombie army, which are old tests, which are running which take some time. There are also TCK tests. Currently, we can run TCK tests directly from the Glassfish. I will speak about it on some of future next slides. Glassfish Zombie Army, it was created by Sun or Oracle, or maybe some tests are even older. Most of them are running now. It's around 5,000 tests, and Jenkins runs them for every PR created. TCK Runner, it's a workaround for UNT-based TCK tests, which remained in Jakarta EE10 yet. The TCK team now refactors them, so they will be based on Maven, Arquillian, and JUnit 5, and it should be finished soon. They asked community for help, so if you have some time, you can help them too. Glassfish paints. Most of features are covered by integration tests, and there is just limited amount of unit tests. It's running too long, and it's hard to maintain them. But I found that I forgot the module, and in one module is HK2 plus EJB for GF core based tool for running unit tests for EJB. Everyone who listens this, it's about 70% of the path we needed 20 years ago. It's a shame. We rewrote deployment library. It still uses the slow XML parser. It's overcomplicated. It uses reflections, but we improve it quite significantly. So deploys should be now faster. Somebody told me that it's not. I think we have a issue for that. We have to investigate what is happening there. I believe it could be another issue somewhere. Go on. Glassfish treatment. In this slide, it's basically visible how significant progress we made last years, and we are continuing in this direction. And Glassfish build Maven plugin. It uses customized Maven lifecycle to process Glassfish jar projects modules. And we refactored it. We removed all those OSGI bundle files, so everything is standardized to usual Maven, or we are using standard tools in recommended ways, basically. We are avoiding to our own customization and this because it always means maintenance and issues. Currently, Glassfish uses Java 17 for compilation, but it's compiled for Java 11 because Glassfish 7 must be compliant with Jakarta E10, which is based on 11. We do also experimental compilations with other newer versions of JDK. So we are on track. I would call we are on highway while we had to go from mud. Are getting faster. I will switch now to Arjan. He will tell you more about archaeology, history, and future changes.
All right. So thank you, David. It was a good introduction to all the things we did for Glassfish. So Glassfish is quite an old project. It came a long way. So I'll tell you a little bit how we started, where we came from, and where we're heading to. So Glassfish actually started in January of 1996. It's quite an old application server. Actually, it was one of the, or it is one of the oldest around. So it derived from something called the Kiva Enterprise Server. It was one of the first Java application servers all the way back in January 1996, approximately the same time period that Java itself came out. So that was really quite early. And this company became successful quite fast, actually. So they grew to like 100 employees, and they charged a lot for those application servers at the time. So they were like easily $25,000 per CPU, which is quite unheard of today, but those were the costs back then. So a major milestone in the history of Glassfish was when Netscape, quite famous from the Netscape browser, they acquired Kiva, and they called it the Netscape application server. It's still the same code, just renamed. So this was quite a big deal back then. Something like $180 million were involved. It would be about $300 million in current currency. So this was quite a big thing already. So then in March 1999, there was an alliance formed between Sun and Netscape. This was done by American Online. And they were building again on the application server concept. So they already had an application server called Net Dynamics, and Netscape had their own application server, as I just mentioned. And they wanted to unite those things. And the way they wanted to unite them and to make them compatible with each other, since they still had their existing customers, was via this new called programming model, and that was J2EE, precursor of Java EE and then Jakarta EE as we know it today. But one of the interesting things perhaps is that one of the I think it was the CTO, was one of the co-founders of Next in 1985, I think, which is quite famous now from the Apple computers. Okay, so let's move forward a little bit. So the name Netscape was decided to be dropped. Netscape wasn't that popular anymore at the time, and it became iPlanet, quite famously perhaps after the iMac, maybe a connection there between the guy working for Next and then Apple having the I for everything. So iPlanet was created. We move on a little bit to like one of the first releases of the server. They started with version 6 because they had all this history before from Net Dynamics and the Netscape application server 4. So then 6 became the next logical version number. And the interesting thing here is perhaps that the iPlanet application server was the first to be certified for Sun's J2EE, which at the time was still quite small. It had servlet EGB, but not that much more. I think the price already dropped quite a bit. I think it was like 5,000 per CPU at the time. Still a lot of money, especially today when like most application servers are free. But then it was around 5,000. Also interesting perhaps is that the application server back then weren't pure Java yet. So they contained parts of them were written in C++. It was the popular language at the time, and a complete move to Java wasn't done yet. So this changed in October 2003 when the server was again renamed. It now became the Sun1 application server. And this was part of the entire Sun1 brand of line. So there were more products available under the Sun1 brand. So this was a major rewrite. We don't know exactly how much code was reused, probably a lot, but not everything. It wasn't directly based on the previous iPlanet, but still, we can assume a lot of code was still reused. You don't write something like that completely from scratch. So at the time, we did had multiple implementations for Sun as well. And one of them was just called the RI, or the reference implementation. This was quite a distinct thing back then. It was a server completely built and maintained just for the purpose of being a reference implementation of J2EE. So other vendors implementing it could take a look at that and get some hints on how to implement certain things. Tomcat 4 was in scope already, so it was also based on that. And we still see this back today, like parts of Glassfish, specifically the server bits, the servlet bits, I have to say, some of the JSP, JCL, special language things, they're still based on Tomcat from 2003, and of course enhanced along the way. So then in March 2004, we got again a rename. So they were kind of fond of renaming back then, like every year, every version, there was a different name. And in 2004, the name of the year was Sun Java System Application Server. They did retain the version, so we went from 7 to 8. So there was some consistency there. And this one was basically the basis of Glassfish. It was version 9 of that one was essentially Glassfish 1.0. Okay, so then in March 2010, we had like a major shift in the force, so to speak, when Oracle acquired Sun. A lot of things changed there. The focus was different. Oracle already had their own history with application servers. They had WebLogic, they had OC4J. So they had a lot of competing technology internally. And nevertheless, Oracle did release a bunch of Glassfish versions, like 3.1 all the way to 5.0. But there weren't big changes in them. They were mostly updated for components, Jakarta EE, Java EE components. So then in 2017, we're getting closer to the current time, we had another of those major shifts. Was when Oracle announced to transfer Java EE, including Glassfish and a lot of components, to the Eclipse Foundation. So this was a big process. and it stalled development of Glassfish, of Jakarta EE quite a bit. So we had multiple things going on. We had a verification build in 2019, took about a year to complete. Then we had Jakarta EE9, which took another year, basically. It was just about the namespace change. And a couple of months later, we had Jakarta EE9.1, which was again just about supporting a single thing, in this case, JDK 11. Glassfish changed along with that, improved in its major versions, but other than that, not much change. It was still essentially the same Glassfish 5 with Java EE8, just different license, different namespace, and support of a newer JDK. All right, I can move to the next slide if you want. All right, so the current Glassfish. So after the move to Eclipse, it became quite active again. So there were a lot of contributors active among myself and David. And we slowly started to see a monthly cadence starting again. So before the release of Glassfish were quite irregular. Under Oracle, there were like the major releases, but in between, not that much happened. After the move to Eclipse, things started to heat up again, and we got into this monthly cadence. Bug fixes, component updates were quite timely and regular again. So to support this process, among others, we founded the Omniface company. This was in April 2022. By myself, David, and Andro, who will also give a presentation on this conference today. So go see his talk as well. And then we had another major milestone in December of 2022 with Glassfish 7. So Glassfish 7 was essentially the first version that really introduced a lot of new features, a lot of new Jakarta EE components, because it was a Jakarta EE10 certified server. So this essentially started, like really kickstarted things again. We were dormant, Glassfish was dormant for quite some time, but now things started to really heat up again. So for this specific release, Omnifish was the largest contributor, and we adhered to a strict monthly cadence. So from 7.0 on, every month we had like a Glassfish release. And one of the things we focused on was to support the latest JDKs quite rapidly. So we had to address quite some technical debt, as David mentioned. So this was one of the advantages that we had, because we addressed all those technical debt things. The workarounds were removed. This made it possible to more clearly support those newer versions of the JDK. And in addition to that, in just being Jakarta EE 10, we also started to support microprofile. So as people quite often say, microprofile is essentially a Jakarta EE 1.5, so it's an addition to Jakarta EE, even though it can be used standalone. It's quite often used in combination. But part of microprofile is also intersecting with Jakarta EE. There's a special profile for that, the microprofile. Study the core profile, that's the overlap between the microprofile and Jakarta EE. And like I say, Glassfish started to support that too. So at the moment, we only support two of them, so microprofile config, which we share with Helidon from Oracle, and microprofile JWT, which we delivered through the Omnifaces project, which is an open source org, separate but closely related to Omnifish. And specifically in Glassfish, the microprofile JWT is an authentication mechanism for Jakarta security. So it's completely interoperates with that. It's not in anyway special. It's just like a default standard compliant authentication mechanism for that. In the specification, this is not yet the case, but we are looking at the bridge spec to specify what we already did in Glassfish. All right. So one of the another thing we did in order to get the architecture of Glassfish more clear and make things more consistent internally is to extract several internal components, or maybe not even components, they were more like pieces of code intertwined with a lot of other code. We moved them to standalone projects. So before there was no individual implementation of Jakarta authorization. So one of the first things we did was extract that code from Glassfish and develop it within Omniface's project first, then Omnifish, and then we moved it to the Eclipse Foundation. And we did the same thing for Jakarta authentication. So this was before just a piece of code within the Glassfish code base. Other application servers have a similar thing. The code is not clear, separate module. It's just all over the place. At least in Glassfish, it was all over the place. And we moved that to a clear separate module. So this makes all the borders of what we do, of how the security flows within Glassfish work quite a bit clearer. And as an extra bonus, we can use those standalone projects within other runtimes. For instance, Piranha can use it, Tomcat can use it, so that's a bit more convenient for everybody. And we have a clear implementation that people can look at. Okay, so this was all about the current situation of Glassfish. The future, the next Glassfish, has just started this very month. So we started development on Glassfish 8, milestone 1 to be specific. And milestone 1 will align with the Jakarta EE 11 M1 release that we're currently doing. So Jakarta EE 11 milestone 1 is a not strictly coherent release of Jakarta EE. It's basically all the specification components are releasing milestones of their APIs. So it's basically to show what's going on. It's for early feedback. It's for very early developers to play with, but it's like still very much in an alpha state. So there's not much practical use at the moment, but like early adopters can play with it. So we have this list of things there, which were just removed from screen, but I will not go into all of them. But
Time is
Jakarta,
funny.
yeah, no worries. Jakarta authorization has the most changes there at the moment for us. Jakarta authorization was heavily based on the Java SE policy class, and the Java SE policy class is to be removed in some future version. It's currently deprecated for removal, which means it will be removed, but we're not sure when. But to be ready for that future, we're having it removed already. So Jakarta authorization is a low-level SPI. Very few application developers will ever need to touch it. It's the foundation between or below Jakarta security. It's used by a lot of application servers. Not all use it, but it's there. And one of the things we did was to replace the policy there with a new object. At the same time, we'll not go too deep into this, but Jakarta authorization was always intended as a somewhat almost beyond the spec thing, where you could completely change how authorization worked, but you had to install a jar in an application server specific way. So it's not very friendly to average developers. There was a lot of knowledge that you still needed about your application server. It was like really portable. You had to know the implementations of things that you interacted with. So we made those things a bit more standard. So the old way of being like really application server specific is still supported. We didn't remove that. So we still make use of like the subject type, which is a really open-ended type to hold a bunch of so-called principles. You don't know what those principles are. So application servers can do like really specific things with them. But we also standardized a lot. So it's much more friendlier to use, even though it's still targeted at application server developers and not so much at application developers. So I will not go into the other things, but you can exploit them on your own if you want. So one of the other things briefly wanted to mention about Glassfish and its history is that Glassfish is not just a single server like some of the other servers maybe are, but it's more like a family of products. So the Glassfish source code is quite used by other projects which are outside the Glassfish project. So I will name a few. There are more, but those are the most well-known ones. There's the Fujitsu server from Japan, and it is the fork of Glassfish, but it does sync back all the time with Glassfish. And the Fujitsu people are also quite active in the Glassfish project. But it's a separate server. It has its own identity, it's its own audience. But that's an interesting thing there. Then we have the Piyara server, which is a fork of Glassfish, but based on a much older branch. It's from Glassfish 4.1. And this was forked before it was donated to the Eclipse Foundation. So it still uses the original license as the Piyara Foundation is not the owner of the source code. They of course can't change the license. They have to keep that as per the original one. So in the past they did contribute to Glassfish and Jakarta EE there as well. Then we have the Primetime application server. It's a kind of a redistribution of Glassfish for China. They're not that active within the source code, but they are active in the foundation with regards to the working group. So they have input there. They sit on the application on the working group. So they are active there. Same goes for the other one, InfoSuite. And finally, we have like a special case, Piranha Cloud. Piranha Cloud is not so much a redistribution of Glassfish. It has a completely different source base, but by strategical design, it does reuse all the components of Glassfish. So it attempts to be highly compatible with Glassfish, even though it's a completely different server in terms of internal architecture. Okay, so a quick note about Glassfish in 2024. So what are we going to do? So obviously the big thing is Glassfish 8 and Jakarta EE11. That will be the focus going forward. We will still support Glassfish 7, of course. There will still be Glassfish 7 releases, but Glassfish 8 and Jakarta EE11 will be the main focus to get that done. We will keep improving the internal architecture, and we basically do that to support stability, performance, maintainability. Mention that a little with the components that we extracted, so to make borders with internally more clear. So you have all those information flows, all those data flows going on. If they're all over the place, they're quite difficult to debug. When you have clear boundaries in modules, it's easier to maintain. And we're also going to improve the test coverage even more. So this was, as David mentioned, one of the focus points. We invested a lot in making tests runnable again, in adding tests, and we will continue doing that. So 2 new features are probably a production-ready domain.xml, special configuration file tuned for production use. Virtual thread support is on the list as well, so I'm going to do something there. And maybe, so we're not really sure yet. We'll look at the new admin UI. It could be Jakarta Faces based, maybe go a bit in a different direction to a Java FX based one. We're not really sure. But the old one is based on extremely old technology, and it hurts maintainability. It hurts our ability to do anything there. So we might want to replace that. Okay, so a quick word about the other server you mentioned, Piranha. So Piranha is supported by Omnifish as well. And one of the goals that we were looking for is to make it production ready. So it's more or less a side project at the moment. We have funded it, but it's not going that fast compared to Glassfish. But we do want to make it a separate project or a separate product within the Glassfish lineup. So Glassfish is for your typical application server use case. So you can deploy things, undeploy, run multiple applications. There's a management interface, there's an admin console, there's all those things. Piranha is more like a bare bones runtime. It's much smaller, much leaner. You can run it as a separate jar file, kind of like Spring Boot. But it's not as feature rich as Glassfish. And we try to keep a high degree of compatibility between the two for all the reasons that were mentioned before. Okay, you can go to the next slide if you want. So we do have some visions. We don't have time to go into them, but there's a lot of stuff to explore.
I will say Adam BN asked me in one interview what are my visions about Glassfish in 2040, and I was surprised by that question. So I tried to imagine some usages of Glassfish, because 20 years ago, Glassfish or any other application server was quite huge software. It started slowly. It required expensive hardware. Now we run it on laptops in 5 seconds. So cell phones have terabytes of memory nearly now. Whatever we can come in 2040, we should be ready for that, for the future.
All right, so I see we have some questions here. So the big question is, does anybody use this Glassfish these days? So the answer is obviously yes. So there's still a lot of existing Glassfish installations. So some of them are, as the market probably knows, attempting to migrate to other things. It's basically our mission to make Glassfish good again, so that this migration will not be necessary. Like we said in the beginning or the middle of the presentation, Glassfish has stalled for some time. Jakarta EE itself stalled for some time, and we're trying to reinvigorate that so that companies don't have to switch. And if they're thinking about switching, they can contact us and we can help them with seeing where Glassfish does not meet their demand and try to address that as best as we can. And there was another question, what market segment Jakarta EE going to address? Well, the Jakarta EE market segment is essentially the all server-side development. So the Jakarta EE APIs, they're essentially separate from the application server concept, as we demonstrate with Piranha, but other products like Haladon and Quarkus to some degree do the same thing. And it shows that the Jakarta EE APIs themselves are not about application servers. So they're about server-side computing. They provide a lot of functionality for handling HTTP requests, for security, for validating incoming parameters, for rendering HTML on the server, which is in some cases much faster, since you send ready to render HTML to the client. It's not for all cases, but for some. So those APIs are quite valuable, and the market segment is essentially the same market that's being served by things like Spring, by Micronaut, by the Play framework that we had before. So that's essentially the market segment. All right, so maybe one question for you, David, to answer. How would you recommend to start with if deployment will be in a Kubernetes pod?
Kubernetes pod. Our builds on Jenkins are in Kubernetes pod, but I don't have enough experiences with Kubernetes yet. It's always something when I need something to do, I will do that. But it's maybe we will welcome some help with that. Create some examples and then define what is missing, what we should implement on the Glassfish side to make it easier. Like I could imagine somehow the default domain XML is limited for half gigabyte heap. Maybe it should be depending on Kubernetes pod settings somehow, and so on.
Okay, so we're at the time, we're out of time at the moment. So everybody, thank you for watching our presentation. David, thank you for all your wonderful stuff about the refactoring and the testing and what have you. And we'll all hope to see you in our next presentation from OmniFish by Andro. So thank you
Thank
very
you for
much.
watching and see you next
And
time.
see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.